Welcome, everyone. Hi. Hi, thank you so much for being here tonight. My name is Roz Cruz, and I am the Associate Curator of Programs here at WICMA, and I'm just so thrilled that you're all here. As we gather in this space at Williams College, which we respectfully acknowledge sits on the ancestral homelands of the Stockbridge Munsee Mohicans, who are the indigenous peoples of the region now called Williamstown. Following tremendous hardship after being forced from their valued homelands, they continued as a sovereign tribal nation in Wisconsin, where they reside today. We pay honor and respect to their ancestors, past and present, as we commit to building a more inclusive and equitable space for all. I just want to say how inspired I am to see so many people here and from various communities. Could you raise your hand if you've never been to WICMA before? Oh, great. Okay. We got a good following here of people that come regularly. So this is I'm so proud to present this program. It's the first in a series of 4 called Construct Your Own Meaning. So here we are at Construct Your Own Meaning Brewers. These programs invite community members, including beer brewers, musicians, young people, and cake artists to interpret our permanent collection installation called Remixing the Hall. Each participant in the series has made a creative response to an on-view work from the collection, and they'll present it at some point throughout the summer. So today you'll see the beer and taste the beer version of the program. So by giving a diverse set of people outside the museum the agency and platform to share their personal connections with the artwork in our collection, we're hoping that this will broaden who the museum is for and also expand how the collection can be used as a tool for learning. This series asks audiences to see relationships between disparate objects and experiences, complicating the past and the present. So each of these events will be 2 hours on Thursdays throughout the summer, and they'll each have a talking portion and a celebration portion. And we also have, in addition to those 4 programs, we have a program next Friday celebrating the closing of Across Shared Waters, which is our exhibition upstairs. Hopefully you've seen it, and if not, you still have a week to catch it or come back next week at 5 p.m. for a celebration on Friday. Now for tonight, we're going to hear from an artist named Eric Steen, who is somebody that I've known for many years and have been a fan of. We first met in Portland, Oregon, where he was organizing a public event at the Portland Art Museum that brought together beer brewers and a painting called The Drunken Cobbler, which is in the collection there at the Portland Art Museum. And I knew right away, seeing that project, that he is somebody that's incredibly thoughtful and deliberate in how he approaches challenging the status quo about what art is and what art should be in museums, which is also something I'm interested in. So anyway, Eric is a socially engaged artist based in Oregon, where he's the founder and director of Forest Green PR, a company that specializes in public relations and brand management and represents innovators, environmentalists, and artisans. He also founded and directs Beers Made by Walking, which is a national program that invites brewers and outdoor enthusiasts to go on hikes and make new beer inspired by the plants from the trail. So this project is currently engaged with lots of environmental institutions and organizations and more than 150 breweries across 6 states. I will also say that Imbibe magazine named him one of the top 75 people who will change the way you drink. And additionally, Eric's just been out there working with brewers and museums across the country doing this project called Art and Beer, which is what we're experiencing today. And he made an iteration of this project for WICMA. And for the next 45 minutes, we're going to hear him tell us a little bit about how he got started as an artist doing this kind of work. And we're also then going to open it up to the 3 brewers that we've been working with over the last several months, who are regional to our area. Tonight's panelists and brewers shown here, include Sarah Real, owner and co-founder of Plate Brewing Company in Pittsfield, Massachusetts, Connor Johnson, head brewer at Bright Ideas in North Adams, and Kevin Mullen, co-owner of Rare Form in Troy. I hope that you'll engage with all of them at the reception following this talk. You'll be invited to taste each of the beers and also, engage with each other and think about the art and how it connects to the beers. So if you have a moment, you can also enter the galleries and sort of see what's going on with these actual artworks. And while supplies lasts, there is going to be an opportunity to pick up a souvenir glass that was specially made for this event that's got art and beer, Eric's project, on one side and WICMA on the other side. So it's been a true collaboration. I'm going to pass it over to Eric now.
Hi, everyone. My name's Eric Steen, and I'm going to power through this slideshow. There's 120 slides, and I'm going to do it in like 20 minutes. And then we'll talk about art and beer. So first off, I just want to thank Roz for bringing me out here. This has been a really, really cool project, and also Anne for the logistical coordination. This has been great, and also, I was only able recently to see Remixing the Hall exhibition. If you haven't gone and seen it, you should. It's really good and moving, and in a way that I haven't felt about art in a long time. So I encourage you all to check it out. It's impressive. Okay, so I'm going to dive in, and you're going to see lots of pictures of people drinking beer, and I'm going to try to explain like how that is art in some way. We're going to say you can save questions for the group of brewers. Maybe if you want to ask me some questions about my work and stuff like that, then we can do it upstairs while we drink together. My graduate thesis project in art school at Portland State University was this project called Cultivate, where I wanted to bring together a bunch of friends who didn't know each other, and I wanted us to make a bunch of beer together. So this was an invitation that I sent out to all of them. At this point, I had been doing some beer projects. They weren't interesting enough to put up here, but one I will mention, I was paying people to drink with me and encouraging students to skip their classes, have a beer with me, and then we would write their names up on the gallery wall and stuff like that. That's like sort of the background and the context in which I'm making this stuff. So anyway, what we decided to do as this group, Cultivate, was to make a beer, make glassware in which we will drink the beer, make coasters for the glassware to sit on, and make picnic tables that we would sit on as well. So we made everything that we were going to use to have a beer together. These are hops. I'm just going to power through these. This is, beer is on the tabletop here. We're making wort. It's not fermented yet, but we all picked out a recipe. We made the recipe. We looked at all these beer paraphernalia stuff together. What do we want the labels to look like? All this stuff, and made all these decisions as a group. Went out to a friend's house and threw a bunch of pottery, made a bunch of different mugs and things like that. It's funny to see a blue moon on the table there. That's us drinking together. You're going to see a lot of photos like this. So more mugs, painting the mugs. Here they are. Then we made a bunch of coasters, and we bottled it, and we even put our own label on the beer, and then that went up in a gallery after we'd done drinking, and all these people got to see the fun that we had together as a group, and they missed out. So one of the reasons why I like beer, I grew up in a household that didn't really encourage drinking or anything like that. And at the ripe age of 24, I had my first beer. And I was like, whoa, what the fuck have I been missing out on? it was really good. So I decided to learn how to make it. And these are home brewers, and the stuff I'm going to show you, I was thinking a lot about, okay, what are the aesthetics of home brewing beers, and like why, like how is this interesting as an art? Because I was really seeing it as art. And so there's like coolers, and there's kegs, and there's draft lines, and just weird stuff, like these people who all have full-time jobs or are retired, and they're like doing this in their spare time. They're like mini scientists. They're learning all this stuff, and this is like what they love to do, and they're making 150 beers for themselves at a time, and they spend all their waking hours thinking about it. And like this is really cool, gravity-fed system. It's just really cool. Yeah, so I'm just like, I can't talk about all these with the time that we have, but another source of inspiration came from this place, this house right here. It's called Dean's Scene. You see this neon sign. As you're walking by, if Dean's Scene light is on, you know that you can walk into this guy's house and go down into the basement and drink with him and his sometimes wife, sometimes girlfriend, sometimes neither, and like they would talk politics, they would argue with each other, and you would drink. And he literally built out his whole basement into a bar and like a fermenter. He's got fermenters all over the place. He's got his own walk-in cooler. He's got glassware everywhere, and I mean it, like anyone could walk in there if you knew about it. And so this was really inspiring to me. Sorry, this is like before the age of cell phones, and like it is what it is. So anyway, that's his bar. So what I decided to do one day in Glasgow, I was invited to participate in this beer festival or art festival, and I decided that I was going to have my own like illegal pop-up pub, and so just like Dean. And so what I did was I invited 20-something home brewers to make beer, and then we would open up this pub one night and get people lubricated, if you will, and then to celebrate the beer. I mean, it's fun to get drunk, but like it's really a celebration of the beer. And the idea was to like elevate beer into a form of art. So it's on the gallery walls, it's sculptural, and that's kind of like what this is built around. So we had 10 different beers served at a time, all sorts of different colors, different beers. This is people lining up. They had these little publications that explained every single beer that they could drink. Here's a couple of the brewers right here. You see the beers on the wall behind them. And this is kind of the packed house that it was. And this is the sort of aftermath. A lot of the beers blew, and so we would cross them off as we would go. And it like created this like buzz, like, oh, you got to drink this before it runs out, sort of thing. We built the picnic tables again, and yeah, this is just this is how it turned out. Okay, so this is not my work. This is Stephen Boggs, and I've actually decided not to talk about a lot of my inspiration right now, but you are welcome to ask me about this sort of stuff. I will mention this piece because this looks like a $1 bill, but if you really look at it, it's not a $1 bill. And there's like little indications. You just see Stephen Boggs and things like that. What's to see and what to see. I don't have my glasses on right now, but what Boggs would do is he would take these $1, $5, $10, $20, $100 bills, and he would take them to restaurants and things like that, and he would buy things, and he would tell them, like, this is not a $1 bill, this is an art piece, and it's worth $1, or it's worth $100 if it's a $100 bill, and he would negotiate with the server or whatever, and like if it's a $75 dinner, I'm giving you a $100 bill, I want $25 back, and so for me, what I do is very much about this process. It's the process of the interactions with people. It's not like a drawing on a wall somewhere. You know, the important thing to me is like how things are set up and like who becomes the artist in a given project, which some of the other inspiration addresses those particular things. I'm not going to get super into it, but I mean, I got to point this out. It's New York City. So Eve Mosher's drawing like a chalk line on where the, when the sea levels rise, like this is where the water line will be. And so she's making a line drawing in the city. This is Harold Fletcher. You guys can ask me about some of this stuff. It's super interesting. There's not enough time. Rebar it sets up city parks and parking spaces by feeding the meter. An encyclopedia where community members are the experts, and then it's arranged by like the things that they know. So like Gloria Thompson here knows about activism and public housing. Like the encyclopedia becomes about that. Eric May from Chicago, he created a Last Supper for a bunch of raccoons that were going to be trapped and move off this site. And a line made by walking. Richard Long, this is like a very influential piece for me. I even steal the name of the project for Beers Made by Walking. That's how meaningful it is to me. Okay, so back to my work. This is brew pub in New York at the Wythe Hotel. It's another one of these like pop-up brew pub things that I did. This was 2013 or 2011 or something like that. And in this case, I was changing the way that I was thinking about things. I think I had done my first Beers Made by Walking at this point, maybe one or two of those. And I was starting to think about place-based beer and what does it mean to have, like there's site-specific artworks. Well, how could you have a site-specific beer? So what I asked all 20-something homebrewers to do in this case was to make beer inspired by the neighborhood around the transitioning neighborhood that is around the Wythe Hotel. So again, lots of people drinking beer. You see they've got like little brochures that tell them about the beer. I really love this one by Brandon West. He's one of the homebrewers. I'm just going to read this out loud. Williamsburg and Bushwick have both historically been neighborhoods identified with European immigrants, with an Italian community being prominent after the turn of the century. My friends who live in Bushwick had a landlord of Italian descent named Nico, who planted a fig tree on the property and gave figs to the tenants. Nico bought the building in the 80s, lived there for almost 40 years. In the mornings, he would eat a pastry and drink coffee on the stoop. He also used to grow tomatoes every summer. He liked fishing, and he would bring fresh fish he caught to the tenants as well. Nico passed away in 2013. This beer is made with figs from Nico's tree. So, this is a standout one for sure, but like a lot of them, went into this sort of depth. And so, thinking about neighborhoods and beer and how you create something that has a meaning to the place that it's in. And that's where Beers Made by Walking really took off. I started this in, I don't even remember when, 2011, I think. This was the first hike. This is going to jump around quite a bit. The basic idea, again, still working with homebrewers at this point. 8 homebrewers, 8 hikes around Colorado Springs area, and beer inspired by the plants that we find on the trail. And so this is Garden of the Gods area. If you've ever been to Colorado Springs, it's like that's the big site there, it's like the thing. We're looking at mountain mahogany there, and then the guy with the sunglasses and the white shirt, he is the home brewer. I don't really remember the names of all the places, so I'm just going to skip through these. But we're going on hikes with brewers at this point. We found wild hops on one of the hikes. Like weren't expecting that, but there they were. And that was pretty amazing. And then we so this was through the Gallery of Contemporary Art at in Colorado Springs, and they asked me to do something. I said, well, does it have to take place in the gallery? Because at this point in my life, I was like, I'm done with gallery stuff. I'm not doing it. I've since changed, but that's like where my head was at. And so they said, no, doesn't have to be in the gallery. Can it be in a bar and can it be about beer? Yes. Okay. So in this case, we actually, the artwork, the beer is like served at a bar, just like it would normally be served. And so all these people who loved art and who loved beer showed up at the bar, and got these samples. And so they all sampled the beer. That's some of the brewers there, and myself, which is funny because usually I have a beard or a mustache, but I mistrimmed on my way here, and I had to like trim it all down. But usually people don't recognize me, so in that photo. This is Current up in the Rocky Mountains there. This was, okay, at some point I started working with commercial brewers, and this was on a hike with New Belgium Brewing, like literally one of the like 10 largest breweries in the entire country. After the first year of Beers Made by Walking, it got so much attention that I decided to ask all these breweries in Colorado, New Belgium, Ska Brewing, Oscar Blues, like huge breweries, and also some of the smallest breweries in the country, other breweries, and like they all said yes, and I was like, what? Like, you guys want to do this? Okay, I guess I got to get serious about this. And so we ended up inviting brewers to go on all these hikes, and we ended up serving those beers at the Great American Beer Festival in Denver. It's like the largest beer fest in the entire country. So, you know, that sort of becomes venues for me outside of art context is, you know, bars and beer festivals. Here we are in Portland, Oregon, looking at the cracks in the sidewalk in neighborhoods, you know, to find like invasive plants and things like that. This is in Eugene, Oregon. Yes, there was a beer made with these. This is vanilla leaf, one of my favorite plants that have been used in a beer. It smells like cinnamon and cedar, but it provides no real flavor. It's just an aroma thing. Glassware, you know, pouring the beers for people. People drinking beer, enjoying beer, you know, that's what it's all about. This is just some of the posters and things that I've created around these things. Yeah, you see, you guys are lucky. It's free today. These guys back then, this is 10 years ago. They had to pay $40 to get in. Done it in Seattle, Bend, Oregon. This is a hike in Seattle. I've actually worked with about 300 breweries at this point. Okay, and so at some point I changed things up, and I had become really interested in. Yeah, I got to see where I'm at here. At some point, I started working with environmental nonprofits to lead the hikes. And so they started leading the hikes, and they got to incorporate their sort of educational programming into the hikes. So it wasn't just about the plants that we were looking at. It was about like, what is wilderness and why is it important for our environment and for the water that we drink and for all these things. And so various environmental nonprofits all have different agendas and things that they're working on. And so throughout the entire country, different events would take on these different sort of meanings for the region. This here is in Bend, Oregon. That's the head brewer of Deschutes Brewery. I don't know if you guys know about Deschutes out here, but it's like one of my favorite breweries, and it's gigantic. This is like old growth juniper forest. These trees are 400 years old. And so we walked through wilderness areas, Crux Fermentation Project out of Bend. This is where like the Wychus Canyon and the Deschutes River come together out in Central Oregon. Plants. Okay, so then at some point we took it a step further and decided to ferment beer in the places that we were hiking, and so we made beer and we fermented it, and then we took people out later in the year, went on the hikes, and then they got to, this is the brewer here, they got to try the beer in the exact spot where the beer was fermented. And that was amazing. This is in San Jose, San Jose, California. If you guys have ever been to San Jose, it's just the Bay Area is like completely paved over, but they have this huge, massive restoration project on the salt ponds there, and they're doing their best to restore it. So we had a salt pond hike, and it's funny because basically you get like 6 invasive plants that can grow there, and then mustard and stuff like that, and this dodder plant which takes over, and then pickleweed. This is pickleweed. Sorry, blurry. I've never took a photography class. I'm an artist, but so I've got the whole blurry aesthetic thing down pretty good. I'm into that. This is a native plant, and it grows around salt ponds, and it turns out that it makes beer taste really salty. Anyway, I'm not going fast enough. This was the 10th anniversary of Beers Made by Walking, and the hike was 2 years ago. The pandemic canceled the event, and then so we did the 10-year anniversary tasting last year back in Colorado Springs, where everything started. Worked with some commercial brewers out there, and it was a really great opportunity to just bring it back to where it all started. It felt good. And these are the plants that we found on that hike. It's a lot of them. And then, that's a prickly pear cactus there. We dispersed milkweed. And then we sampled the beers. This is Atravita Brewing Company. This just a great group of people. A lot of these folks were my friends for years as I lived there. I was going to sort of transition out of talking about these as art projects and more about like beer as my as this like strange lifestyle that I adopted, and how serious I am about it. So you all might not remember, like in 2017 there was an eclipse, but for us in Oregon it was a huge deal because it was like just south of Portland. It was a 100% totality, and so it just so happened that this is like where a quarter of the world's hops are grown in Oregon and Washington and Idaho, like that's where the eclipse path was. So I got to spend the night in a hop field, and this is in the middle of fresh hop picking season. And so there's all these farm workers out there. They work 24/7, and they never, like, there are no breaks, but there was a break for hours, like to like experience the eclipse. It was the most, like, I don't know how to describe it. I was in the 1989 earthquake in California, and there was that, and then there's the eclipse. Like, those are the things that like stand out to me, that were just so weird. But so I began working professionally in the beer industry. Because of Beers Made by Walking, I got a lot of opportunity in the beer industry, and I now run my own company where I help breweries with marketing and PR, community engagement, things like that. I organized the Salmon Safe IPA Festival, which Salmon Safe is a certification that hop fields, wineries, business parks, and things like that can get. It basically means that the water runoff that happens on your field or in your business park does not negatively impact salmon, the indicator species in the Pacific Northwest. And so there's increasing in the Pacific Northwest. There's an increasing amount of hop farms that are Salmon Safe certified. So usually when you are buying hops from Oregon and Washington, there's a very good chance that they're Salmon Safe certified, which is really good. So all the beers at this festival were salmon safe, 100% salmon safe, the malt and the hops. I worked with Hopworks Urban Brewery. I was their marketing manager for a few years, where I got to work with Patagonia, the clothing company, and they have like a whole food line. And so they wanted to create a beer called Long Root using a special grain that they developed. And it's called Kernza. And that's what it looks like there. So it has this massive long root that you normally don't see in other types of, grain plants. And it is a plant that comes back every year. So you don't like till the soil and release carbon into the atmosphere for it. So Patagonia developed this beer with the brewery that I was working for, and I got to work on that project, which was pretty badass. And now they're working with a lot of breweries. They worked with Dogfish Head on the project as well at one point. I'm close to the end here, but just want to show you a few things, like, again, outside of art context, what I've been working on, like, as a marketing person, but these are still very much like my initiatives, if you will. Like, I started them. This was called the Oregon I Am, and there's this coalition of Oregon land trusts. They represent 30 land trusts and conservation areas in the state of Oregon, conservation organizations. And they work to permanently protect land from development. And so they purchase land from landowners, private land, and they also, they make some of it public. They restore it ecologically. They sometimes will make sure that it's in agricultural production forever. And so they created this map of all the public places you could go. And they wanted to do something with the map and beer. And so what I proposed was that we work with breweries around the state, put the map on the labels, and then release the beers all together on the same day. So that's what we did. I'm not going to talk about this too much, but this was open fermentation on a land trust property from Crux in Central Oregon. So they literally brought what's called a cool ship out to one of the properties and let it sit overnight. And that begins to start the fermentation process. So instead of like adding yeast to the beer, it was all happened naturally in open air. Cheers the Land is a very similar project with the Oregon Agricultural Trust. Again, they're permanently protecting land from development so that it's always being used for agriculture. And breweries around the state, and they all used all Oregon ingredients. I'm doing this project again. This was with 8 breweries or 9, and now it's with 18 breweries. This is what some of the newest labels look like. Okay, so art and beer. I'm going to skip through these pretty quick too, so that we can start talking, with the brewers. But the process, so the Brewers they came to the exhibition, and they got to see the artworks, and they chose a number of artworks that they were interested in. We sort of took a deep dive into those artworks. The Brewers all learned about what they were looking at, and ultimately made decisions on which ones stood out to them, and then they made beer inspired by that. And so, this is Sarah here. This is the piece that Sarah chose, and I'm pretty sure she was surprised by the size of it. It's much smaller than it looks on a computer screen, So we'll talk about that. And this is Connor here, looking at one of the artworks, and Ian as well. And so he actually, Bright Ideas decided to choose 3 artworks to be inspired by, and so we'll talk through that as well. So these are the 3 here: this one, and this. Yeah, this is another one of those moments where it's like, wow, that's a lot smaller than I thought it would be. But I think it's really cool how it's sort of integrated into the beer with the grape bottle. You'll hear about that. And this is Kevin from Rare Form, and this is a pretty amazing piece. Again, you got to go check these out in person. It's really beautiful. But I guess the last thing I would say, just to sort of help contextualize this, I feel like maybe I talked about like how beer is fun and interesting to me. The sort of like scripted thing that I say is that like beer to me, there's an artist, Tom Marioni, who talks about beer, and he says beer is a social lubricant, and I agree. And I would add that like beers also can be, if used in appropriate ways, like it's also a social glue. It brings people together. I love how beer is like you sit at a bar stool and you put a beer down and it's like it's a sculpture. Like you could easily that could be in a gallery, like on a bar stool with a pint glass of beer. Like, and so I think of beer as a type of social sculpture in a lot of ways. I'll kind of leave it at that, and we can dig into that, you and me, if you want. So, yeah. Brewers, let's do our thing. Well, beer's going to taste even better. Okay, so where I thought we would start is just a quick introduction from every brewer. I'd love to hear, about your brewery and kind of what you do in it. You're all brewers, but like, how do you see your brewery? And how did you then? The next question is like, how did you start liking beer and getting into beer? And then we'll talk about the artwork after those questions.
So I'm Sarah Rayl from Plate Brewing in Pittsfield. I have been a fan of beer for many years. I'm a rule follower, so I didn't really start drinking until I was of age. And I went to Penn State, so I drank a lot of bad beer. But I love cooking and baking, and I love the alchemy. And I'd always been interested in beer. And then, long story short, I was traveling a lot for work internationally, and my husband started taking up home brewing to fill the time while I was gone. And then he is very complimentary and says that once I started, I quickly became better than he is. I disagree, but again, I like following rules. He does not. So a lot of brewing is following rules. But when I finally decided I wanted to take the leap and become a brewer, we had lost gas in our apartment in Brooklyn, so we didn't have heat, hot water, couldn't cook on our gas stove. And I wasn't about to put off the dream any longer. When we were driving cross country after college, we'd stopped at New Belgium, and I was like, I want to do all of this. I don't know what it is, but I want to do all of this. So that always stuck with me. And so, for hot plate, so it started brewing on a hot plate, which if you've ever even just tried to boil a cup of water, it doesn't really work. But it was our symbol of, do what you can with what you have. And so we moved out of Brooklyn to start the brewery in Pittsfield. We thought it was a city that is starting to rebuild. We realized it didn't really have a third space where people could gather. Our pillars are community, conservation, and, oh my gosh, the third thing. Craft. Thank you. What beer is? Sorry, I'm still working my day job, so it's been a week. So Mike's usually the more eloquent one, and I know he stresses when I'm on a panel. But so for craft, it's not just beer. It is art. It is all of that. We were in the Berkshires for very artistic reasons. And conservation, it is a very intensive process. So how can we go forage for things? How can we be more environmentally friendly? And then community, just we have a place where we have non-alcoholic beers. We have just regular short drinks, like anything, because we want it to be a community space.
So I'm Kevin Mullen with Rare Form Brewing over in Troy. And unlike you two, I started drinking much younger. So I first got into it, really I was between my sophomore and junior year of high school, and I went to visit one of my brothers in high school, or in college, to see what it was a summer college course was like. And I went to a chemistry class, and this is in Colorado, and professor came down, and he kind of said, we're gonna go through this process today, and didn't tell us what we were going to do, but had his backpack and said this equals this, pulled a book out, this equals this, coffee mug equals this, and chair, and pulled some things down, and these two things equal this, chair, and this and this. At the very end, he pulled a beer out of his backpack and put it on the table and said, we just made beer today. And I was blown away because I never thought about actually making beer. I just thought about finding my brother or someone else to buy it for me. So that weekend, we went out and started brewing right away. There's one homebrew store in the area, and started right then and there. So that kind of changed my life around completely. Always enjoyed it, always did it from that point on. And then when we decided to open Rare Form, we were originally in Seattle and moved out to Troy. My wife's a painter, and part of what we wanted to do was create a brewery that was based on one thing was rare. I like to do a lot of odd or different ingredients. We've used all kinds of things, from even 100-year-old church pews in beers to tomatoes to different herbs, you name it. I've tried it, most of it, and if I haven't, I will. And then with the line, the rare form, the form, and a lot of what we like to say is the form of the business, but also of the art and my wife's art and the art that we do, and the brewery itself, the lines of the brewery all focus towards the beer in the background to keep all the focus on what the beer is. And so that's what rare form is. And to us, like, this is a wonderful experience because it kind of really is true to like what we like to do. And so I really thank you for having us on this.
I'm Connor Johnson, head brewer at Bright Ideas Brewing. It's not up there anymore. And I've been doing service industry work my entire working career, starting back in high school, and really was never keen for beer. Tried it in college, didn't like it too much, then had more of it and was like, that's all right. And then I tried the right ones when we took a family trip up to Montreal, and I was able to try some real fun beers up there. Le Fen du Monde is one of them from Unibrew, and that opened my eyes to like, wow, beer isn't just like Keystone Light or PBR or whatever we were drinking. It was this super big and flavorful beer that was really interesting. And but yeah, Bright Ideas Brewing opened in 2016, April of 2016, and I worked on the campus of Mass Mocha for actually since I started working. I worked at a restaurant there, then I worked at the coffee shop, and the owner, Orion Howard, who is a Williams alum, he had been into the restaurant that I worked at a lot, so got to know him. Ooh, hey, ooh, hello. We're back. Maybe. Hello? Cool. All right. Got to know him through him coming in, and then jokingly one day said, hey, you looking for help? Or like, I knew that one of the bartenders was leaving, and that they were looking for another bartender. So I started working pretty much immediately after that, and never had any interest in brewing, never did any brewing. After starting working there, I bought a homebrew setup, and then I have not used it. It's a real nice one too. But then they said that they needed to find a new head brewer and needed help in the back, and they would either hire out or bring me from full-time bartending into learning cellar work and learning the process and everything. And since then, it's been 5.5 years since that change happened, and I started brewing a little over 3.5 years ago, and now I'm making beer full time. So yeah, it's really fun. And Bright Ideas was initially built as this kind of like company and place to bridge the gap between Mass Mocha and the North Adams community. And having worked as the bartender or as a bartender at Bright Ideas for so long, I know all of our regulars, all of our patrons, and I see them still even when I'm working because of the giant glass wall. So they're always waving at me. But one of the cool things is like I take into account that community, and like I can talk to them, and I feel comfortable talking to them and asking, well, what do you like? Like, you want to see another Pilsner? All right, let's get another Pilsner on. Or, hey, this sour is almost about to kick. What fruit would you like in the next one? And like really just bridging that gap, making them feel like they're being heard, and creating this kind of like just overall sense of they're part of it and we all are. So yeah, that's it.
Yeah. So let's talk about this project and art. Maybe if each of you could talk about, you can, however you want, but like when you were looking at the art, what stood out to you about the piece that you chose? What was interesting about it? And then tell us a little bit about your beer and how the decisions that you made in the beer, what we will experience, but also like how the artwork inspired some of those decisions.
We'll just go in order here. I'll start. So I chose this statuette, and it is hilarious because when they sent us through, just looking on the computer screen, I was like, this is great. I do not have a small personality, so I think this is like the second to smallest piece in this collection. So I was a bit shocked, but I chose it because first I was like, oh, it's really fucking old. Like, that's badass. So that's where we started. And then understanding it's wearing the double crown of Egypt, and I have found moving to the Berkshires and moving to Pittsfield that North County and South County, there is a division, and so while I'm not uniting Upper and Lower Egypt, it's not that serious. I'm trying to unite something. My cousin is also very much into Egyptology, so when I sent her a picture, it was just links for days of just like, oh, and this and this and this, and so very interesting to me. But also, in Africa, brewing is a woman's chore. It is part of, bread making. It is what women do. And so for me, that was very interesting that it's just, this is ingrained in them. This is what they do. And then kind of looking further into what happens, the beer has honey in it. Honey is very valued in Egypt, and we had a local beekeeper. They're like hobby beekeepers a couple blocks away that have become regulars, and so we used some of their honey. But then also understanding that there's a beer or a fermented beverage that's made with millet, and it's just like fermented in 2 days. It's still kind of served fermenting. It's cloudy, but I was like, oh, I love millet. I wanted to brew with millet. So there's a little bit of millet in the beer. It is an ancient grain for those who are gluten-free. Sorghum and millet are the base of most gluten-free beers. And then just it's just fascinating to me, that we go back centuries and centuries and centuries of brewing beer and what is, and it was brewed for different reasons, for nutrition, for libation, for all these things, but it is now so commonplace and quotidian, but there is a true art to it. And so I just loved kind of bringing in all these little things to it. And so for my beer, and it's, before the Common Era, which, BCE there, but understanding kind of what was going on there and what was happening, and for me, being a woman in the industry is can be challenging, and so it's we're seen a little bit differently. So I just like the kind of all of it, but it was small. So.
When I saw the Sam Gillian piece on the screen, I didn't realize how big it was either. I was shocked when he came in. I was like, wow. But what I really liked about it is seeing it to me is what's a giant field, huge field. You have grass, you have hills, you have hay, you've got flowers, you've got water. There's all those different colors on there. And it just spoke to me right away was just a Belgian-style saison or a French saison. And with those beers in the past and how they were made is during harvest season, they would open a lot of the windows up, and the harvest in the air would kick up all the wild fermentation, all the wild yeast strains and bacteria and whatever kind of was in the air. That would come across, like the Cool Ship picture that Eric showed earlier, that would come across, and that would ferment that beer and give it a lot of natural characteristics and flavors to it. And so that's what I wanted out of this. I just felt like that piece, just the way that it flows, you can see that, and later found out through the curators that it can be hung in any different way. So many different ways can be hung, just depends on how the curators want to do it. And I thought that was really nice from an art piece and from the artist perspective as well. So with this, I didn't want to get any other characteristics besides just yeast characteristics, really driven from the yeast and then natural grain. Like we got really fresh grain from a farm of ours that we're friends with, and we wanted that to be used in this. So it's a very basic grain recipe but we did do a decoction mash, an old school decoction mash on it to give it a little more characteristic and tradition to it, and then used our house saison strain, which has a little bit of funk to it, not much on this. You'll get a little bit more of very fruit characteristics, a little herbal spice, a clove in there, some like honeydew, almost like rind-ish from the honeydew on it. I also feel like you get with a lot of good saisons, you'll get like a juicy fruit gum characteristic, but I kind of put this one more at, if you remember like the zebra stripe fruit gum, I think you'll get some of that from it, But again, that is all derived just from the yeast characteristic of the beer itself, and I think that that's pretty cool. Based with what his field is doing to me, is it plays off that of getting the characteristics just from those colors and the flow of that, and that's where we wanted it to go, and that was the inspiration in the beer.
Kevin, real fast, could you explain what a decoction mash is, and just like super quick? I know it's not quick, but
Yeah, so a lot of times when people are brewing nowadays, you have over modified grains, so grains that you can get a lot of characteristic out of them, and a lot of the sugars and content broken down for what you want. But we're taking some under-modified grain, and then we're going it through a longer steep period, taking some of that out and boiling some of the grain with it, and then bringing it back into the thing. So before, in tradition, when you would have able to control temperatures perfectly to where you want them, you would have to heat it up in one way. So you'd boil it up to get it hot, a portion of it, and then put that portion back in to raise the temperature for that next set of temperatures that you need to modify, to change the characteristics, trying to do it simply, to change the characteristics in the grain that you need to get, so you can get the sugars breaking down to what you want for later. So it's more traditional. We do it for a lot of our lagers and mess around with it quite a bit.
that might be the simplest explanation I've heard.
I misunderstood, or maybe misread, the initial email. It said to choose 3, and that was choose 3 and then choose 1. But I sat down with Ian, who's our graphic designer, yeah, right there. And again, we're looking at art, so I said, art. And we chose 3 and kind of circled through, and I really approached it initially really just kind of on the nose by names. Like, I was inspired by the names. 3 weeks, Larry Rivers, that immediately was just like, ooh, process, okay. Lagers take time, conditioning time in the tanks. 3 weeks is a quick lager, but we do ours typically for anywhere from 4 to 5 weeks. But so initially it was like, great, another chance to do another lager. That's I'm really into trying to bring back these classic styles and doing something experimental. It seemed like a great opportunity. And then looking at the sarcophagus fragment of Hercules, titled Triumph of Dionysus. That was cool because Dionysus is like wine. Okay, cool, god of wine. There's this really awesome new ingredient. It's been around for, a little over a year now, commercially available. It's called Phantasm, and it's freeze-dried Sauvignon Blanc grape skins. So I thought, how cool would it be if we made a beer and called it Triumph of Dionysus, because we put wine product into the beer. So that was really cool. And that ingredient is loaded with these chemical compounds called thiols. And what happens is if you get a genetically modified yeast that is able to kind of like break down these thiols, you're able to unlock these really cool flavors. And thiols are present in a lot of different hops. You can find it in grain as well. But Phantasm, specifically these New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc grape skins, are just absolutely loaded with it. And we've been making IPAs with them. And I remembered when choosing this maybe a week before, I had seen, oh yeah, our yeast lab that we use, Omega Yeast, try Lunar Crush, our new thiolized lager strain, and said, okay, that's awesome. So it was like, cool, we've got lager, we've got ingredients, there's Dionysus, but then also Triumph, that's a hop. So it's cool. Great, we can add even more. So using 1 for process, 1 for ingredients, was able to pull Triumph hops, and then also the grape must. And then seeing the little still life, which is very little. Again, seeing that close up, it was like, wow, that's you can't tell how big that is. Then we got here to see it, and it was smaller than his head. And the really cool thing that drew us, specifically Ian, to this was following that kind of like late 50s branding, sort of halftone colors. What was it? Offset printing, thank you. And also the kind of the cool thing that the grape juice. One of the things up there is grape juice and raisins, and it's just kind of like this whole thing that ties it all together. And then also the an apple, well, fruit. But the colors, specifically the background colors, are exactly to a T, our brand colors in our main logo. So it was just this kind of like culminating thing that was really cool to kind of tie all 3 together. And looking at everything up front, it was taking all of that at like face value and on the nose. And what was really cool was it wasn't until we came and looked at the art and learned more specifically about 3 weeks, where it was 3 weeks from Larry. Yeah, Larry. It's 3 different depictions of a friend of his, and he painted her in different outfits in different ways, and you kind of see it, and it was really cool because not knowing that, like, we took everything at face value at first, but then going back and learning about it and looking at it from a different perspective, each time we revisited the plan for the beer and what we were doing and why we were doing it, our view on it changed, much kind of like how his view changed from each time he painted or anything like that. So it was just really cool to kind of see it evolve in a way from not really having great understanding of it to a greater depth and cohesion to it at the end. So, yeah.
Yeah. Roz, where are we at?
Well, we've got, let's say, 10-ish more minutes.
Okay. I've got more questions I could ask, but do you have questions? You all just want to drink, huh? Yes.
On your ingredients list with burdock, it grows around here. What do you make? How do you make beer out of it?
Well, no brewer that. Oh yeah. Okay. So the question was on the ingredient list for one of the hikes that I mentioned. Burdock was one of the ingredients. The answer is I've never seen a brewery use burdock. But if I was a brewer and I was using burdock in a beer, I would take some unfermented wort. So that's before the beer is beer. You've boiled it. You've maybe added hops to it at this point. I would take some of that off, and I would get it hot, and I would make a tea with the burdock. And then I would blend it into a fermented beer to taste, so that you're not like hoping that it tastes good. You're like, okay, this is exactly how much it needs. It doesn't need more than this. But questions for the brewers will be prioritized over. Not that your question was bad. I'm not saying that, but I would like to make sure that everyone gets a chance to talk to them. You'll get the chance later, but they're going to be surrounded by people. Go ahead.
Are any of your beers, are these going to be one-offs, or are we going to be seeing these at the brewery?
Are these beers one-offs, or will you be making them regularly?
I'll start. Not sure. It actually hasn't released, so this beer, this is the first time it's available to the public today. It will be available afterwards when I have space on tap, maybe like within the next week or so. So we'll run through this. And actually, we talked about this earlier when we were chatting a little bit. Maybe I will brew it again. I'm not sure. Or maybe like do a variant of it and try to keep, because this was totally experimental. This is the first time we've ever brewed anything like this. So yeah, like there's a good possibility, but there's also a good possibility to like learn and change it and like see how we can improve the process or change it and then have a similar but different beer. Yeah.
Same with for us. This beer hasn't been tapped at the tap room yet, so literally was put in a keg today before I came over here. We will be tapping it sometime next week. It'll probably be a one-off for us, but it will be a different version of something that we will be doing down the road. We always do different saisons and play around with more stuff and experiment. So that I wouldn't say that this beer specifically would be a redone one-off. It's a one-off.
I'm in the same boat. We'll be showcasing it next week on tap. So again, first public. We're all VIPs here. Look at us. I will most likely not be making it again. This was my first time brewing with millet, and I thought my brew house would never be clean again. It's very hard. I will leave that grain to the ancient cultures as well as bread makers. So get it while you can.
Yes.
I've got a beer question and an art question. The art question, have you thought about the reverse process? Have you had the chance to go through this museum and say, this particular piece of art would represent this beer that I already have created? Did you get a chance to think about that?
Maybe in the same vein, but earlier we were looking at, we went downstairs and there was the bottles of Absolute or something, and Aperol. In that area, there's a painting that's from like the 1600s, where it was fresh caught game and produce or something. And I looked at that and I said, man, I wish I'd seen that one, or that had been on our list. Because like looking at that, I was like, oh, what could I make for dinner from that, and what beer would go well with that? So like kind of, but yeah, no, that's what I have for that one.
Pilsner or Quell?
I kind of think it's always on my mind, you know, like you're always kind of looking at things as inspiration, no matter what you can find and where you can see it. You never know when it's going to hit you, or someone might say something, or you might hear a lyric or something along those lines, and it just kind of like, oh, wait, that's a good idea. I didn't think about that. So I think it's always just having your ears and eyes open and ready, and seeing what comes.
I am not the artist in this duo. Mike is a creative one. I'm a researcher by day, so I love Excel. I love boxes. I love anything. But sometimes I often say I don't get art. But oftentimes there are pieces that just, and it's funny because all the pieces that Connor chose, I did have those tabs open of like, ooh, what can I do? But we really strive to tell a story with each beer. So we always think, like, however I'm designing a recipe, why am I designing it this way? Is it because I want to do this? Is it because something I didn't even know inspired me to do it? So we always try and tie back a story with the beer.
Can I ask a beer question then? Why, I'm a traditionalist, I like Pilsners and lagers, I'm not into IPAs. Why are IPAs just driving everything else out, it seems lately, in many places? What accounts for their recent popularity?
I'll answer that offline.
That is a tough one. I think actually that's starting to wean off a little bit. You'll see that dying off, and more Pilsners and lagers are starting to come back. But I think in the beginning, it goes in cycles. Think of like a style or whatever. Everything goes in cycles. Music, right? Beer's been doing that for a long time too. It comes in through waves, and there's certain things that might peak for a little bit and they stay. Now the IPA one has definitely peaked and held on for a while longer, but there was different variations of IPA through that realm. And the bitterness took off in the beginning, and then it became a softer, more or less bitter, but fruit forward characteristics that were naturally, and then it became different versions of that between lactose and heavy fruit and all that. But now everyone's kind of getting tired and old of that, and it's starting to die off. And I always think whenever you want to look at what are the next beer styles that are coming to bed, you should just look at what brewers are drinking. Because brewers are drinking it, everyone else kind of follows down the road, but brewers get tired of something. Brewers were tired of IPAs years ago. Sours kind of getting a little bit, a couple times they had some shots, but it's really going back to, I think, more lagers and traditional beers for a little while. Now the IPAs will never die off, but they're not going to be the mainstay, I think, of what how the trend's going to go for a little while.
I think I saw a question here.
It was about IPA, because I wondered if any of these beers are IPAs, and how I became familiar with it. A friend introduced me. My father was a beer drinker. I never liked it, and I was a wine drinker. And my friend introduced me to an IPA, and I had heart surgery up north, and I went to Bennington for my rehab after the surgery. And I was driving down Route 7 and I saw Hoppy Valley. And I asked, in fact, at Bright Ideas if they ever used the hops from Route 7. And at the time, I don't think they did. So I just decided that I liked that hoppy flavor in beer. And I actually looked up to see if it was good for me. That it is good for me. So are any of your beers the ones today?
Mine is not an IPA, but you will find some similar fruit characteristics that you might find in some hops, but it doesn't drink like an IPA, no.
Mine is not an IPA,
Mine is not. Mine's just an experimental pale ale, but there you do get some of the notes of citrus, jasmine.
Okay. We had one more question, and this person's been waiting.
Yeah, I'm curious, Eric, if you've ever had your work collected by a museum, and what form that took, and for the three brewers, what form you would want your beer to take as something that a museum or art collector could collect.
I have never I mean, I'm totally open to the idea. No, I have a whole book of proposals for museums, so no joke. It's called Ideas That Went Nowhere, and I sell it for $10. And I'm totally serious. I have a book.
For me, it is about what we strive to do in our tap room is making a connection. That's what I want people to take away, whether it's connecting with a flavor that reminds you of something, connecting with a person you never met, connecting with someone you decided to meet there, connecting with yourself in some way. So for me, I would love if every time someone left the tap room that they made some sort of connection in their life.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a tough one because beer is a thing that kind of, it comes and it goes, right? There's a time best to drink it, and there's a time there's not. And there's so many other things that are a part of it. It's such a social, as we learned today from Eric too, it's such a social thing. So a lot of it is memory and what you think of when you leave the place, or what you have when you had it last, or when you're drinking something like it, or what you have it again, what it takes you back to the moment where you first had it. Or the first moment that you had a beer that really like blew your mind, like, wow, this is something unique. This is not, this, or this is takes you to that space. I think that's the main thing with this. So I think it's hard for a gallery to have that type of, piece, but I think the memory is the big one.
Yeah, he basically summed it up pretty well.
Well, how about a round of applause for Sarah, Connor, and Kevin?
Wow, amazing group of people up here, and so exciting to see so many faces. So we're gonna head outside, and there is a table with glassware. You can pick one up. You have your tokens. You'll give your token to the beer pourer, and then you'll get your beer, and you'll try them all. And you'll have a snack, and hopefully you'll see the museum and come back for more. So thank you.